The Mayor's Office of Fair Housing and Equity will hold a free open house this Saturday in Roxbury. The event will have information about everything from discrimination to home buying and searching for affordable housing. To tell us about the event and how the office can help is its director, Will Onoha. Thank you very much for being with us, Will.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Well, I want to start with the basics of housing discrimination, because a lot of people, they don't have a clear idea of what this means. There are protected classes of people you cannot discriminate against. So what are we talking about exactly?
So, good question. So what we're talking about, or at least what our office does, is the primary thing we do is we protect people against discrimination in housing. And our goal for our office is really to reduce barriers or eliminate barriers to housing, because housing is a very crucial need for all people, all residents of the city of Boston, and to eliminate discrimination, eradicate it in its entirety. To do that, there are about 14 protected classes that we look at through our office, that we make sure that you cannot discriminate against these 14 protected classes. And some of them are some of the basic ones that people have probably heard of, right? So like race, color, religion, or religious creed, marital status, disability, handicap, children, national origin, sex, gender identity, rental assistance, age, ancestry, and sexual orientation are the 14 classes that we protect against. So what this basically means is that if you are a lender, if you're a landlord, or if you are a housing provider, you cannot deny someone housing for any of those 14, because they fall into any of those 14 categories.
Well, I imagine it's possible for discrimination to take place, and the person who's victimized can't always pinpoint it and prove it. But when people complain to you, what do they usually talk about?
So, it varies. When people complain about discrimination, we see a lot of cases where people complain about it for race. We see a lot of cases where people complain about it for their family status. We see a lot of cases where people who are immigrants can complain about it, or people who might be Section 8 voucher holders. Those are the typical things we see, and in seeing that, we do an investigation. And in our investigations, we do a deep dive into it to really figure out if in fact discrimination did happen here. And once we have probable cause, we move the case forward. Many times along the way, a respondent has the ability to try and resolve it before we actually prosecute these cases before the Boston Fair Housing Commission. And if it's not resolved before them, if it's not resolved before we get to the Boston Fair Housing Commission, then the commission hears the case. We present all the evidence that we have. And then from there, the commission can sanction, they can fine, they can they have a wide range of tools that they can use to correct, both discipline and correct someone who has engaged in a discriminatory practice. Some of the other things that they will require is that such person or such individuals go to have some kind of training on diversity and discrimination training, so they're not likely to repeat the same instance. They may even require them to pay for a billboard. There's got to be some kind of public awareness that they do, to show that they are actively taking part in their own edification of knowing what discrimination is and what discriminatory practices are, and also warning others about not doing the same thing.
I imagine if somebody is looking for a place to live, they don't have much time to spare. So I imagine people sometimes saying, I think I've been discriminated against, but I just don't have time to go through the paperwork and the process. But what have you seen? I mean, are there cases where people say, yeah, I'm glad I did it and it was really worthwhile?
Certainly, and that's, oftentimes people worry about that, or they're not sure where to go when they're dealing with discrimination cases. And if there's someone who is just really in search of housing and they've been discriminated, they've been discriminated against, oftentimes because they may be in on a time constraint to get into some kind of housing, they will just, they can, they'll forget about it, or they'll make a complaint and, not really check back in. And what I mean by that is our goal, once we come across a situation like that, once we do what is called an intake, and we start to look through, the facts of what did or didn't happen, is to, one, give that person a timeline of what it is or how long this particular case may take us to resolve, and to continue to fight on their behalf, to make sure we continue to work with the respondent of whomever the person is that's accused of this discrimination.
This has been the news, and we're talking with Will Onoha from the Mayor's Office of Fair Housing and Equity. Will, you're holding an event on Saturday that is not just about discrimination, but you're trying to help people with some other things as well. So explain the strategy around this.
Oh, so Saturday, April 13th is our Boston Fair Housing Open House that is free and it's open to the public. This is something that the mayor requires us to put on every year. Also, April is Fair Housing Month, and the beautiful thing about this particular event is that we are in the 51st anniversary of the Fair Housing Act that was passed, during the Civil Rights Movement. And what we want is to make sure that we allow the City of Boston residents to know all of the housing resources that are available to them, both for renters and for buyers. We're going to have a couple of different workshops that will be happening that day, some keynote speakers. Just to run you through the program a little bit, the Commissioner Sheila Hubbard from Mass Committee Against Discrimination will be there. She'll be the keynote speaker. We're expecting the mayor to show up at some point. Also, during this event, there'll be multiple housing providers. So there'll be the Office of Neighborhood Development that will have the Office of Housing Stability. That's also part of that department, and they will be answering all kinds of questions and dealing with all kinds of housing issues that someone may have. There'll be even a portion where they deal with, there'll be workshops where they'll be teaching people about credit repair. There'll be a workshop that will deal with affirmative marketing, which is the tool that the City of Boston uses to both get the word out to residents about property or developments or rentals throughout the City of Boston, in new buildings all across the city. We'll just call it new developments. And so they spread the word. They also are the ones that control the application process as well. They'll educate people on how to apply for the new housing that's coming up in the city. They will also do a workshop, even for developers, on how to get their applications in. The credit building workshop will also take place. And then our shop will also do a kind of a know your rights workshop. So we teach people about what discrimination in housing looks like, what it is, the types of things that they would need to, types of evidence that they would need to gather to strengthen their case for us if they wanted to bring a complaint against a landlord or a bank or a lender or a property owner who they felt discriminated against them.
Now, I know you mentioned a number of participants, but there is one city agency that's going to be part of this event that I think helps people deal with a very common problem right now, and that is if you've been in an apartment for a while, maybe the property changes hands, and the rent's going to go way up, you're worried about being evicted, and I guess the city can help people with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But how exactly do you mean that?
Well, I mean, it doesn't mean that they're going to stop the eviction in its tracks necessarily, but a lot of people might be afraid that they have to be out within 30 days, and maybe if they know their rights, they can...
Absolutely. So the Department of Housing Stability, they will do a workshop on that portion of it. They're the ones who really deal with that. So and this is a very, very normal and common fear people have. So if a property changes hands, Oftentimes people worry, yes, will the rent go up? Will I be evicted? Or will the new buyer want to just, So their job, one of the things they do is they focus on increasing housing stability. So they're the ones, they can do a mediation between landlords and renters, try and provide some type of assistance, both financially, but also help landlords and renters come to a common understanding of what will be taking place, or even if it results in the renter having to leave at some point because, a new landlord wants to, say, live there or renovate the entire place or what have you. They're very good at working out those situations. So, whomever the person is does not end up on the street or homeless or just kicked out just like that. No, we do everything humanly possible to work with them and make sure that it's a smooth transition, if a transition will, in fact, take place. And oftentimes they don't.
Right. Now, another thing you have on the agenda is to help some people with home buying. And, I guess there's probably more to this than just some of the usual advice, because there might be some programs out there that reduce the cost of home buying for some people, right?
Absolutely. The city of Boston has an affordable home buying program through the Home Center that's also part of the Department of Neighborhood Development. And they will also be there. They will be doing an educational workshop on teaching first-time home buyers, and even if you're not a first-time home buyer, but home buyers in general. And we focused on first-time home buyers. Why? Because there's lots of people who want to own a home, but they need help, and they need to understand the process to how to do it and how the city lottery works when it comes to home buying. So the Home Center will be there to do a thorough walkthrough to help anyone whom is at that point and ready to transition to buy a home, especially first-time home buyers.
We should finally mention a little more details on the exact time and place for the open house.
Yes, so the event will take place at 122 Dewitt Street, which is the Dewitt Center, which is right behind Madison Park High School. The event is from 10 to 3 p.m. We will serve breakfast and lunch, so we want to take care of the public. And it's just, I think that day is going to be a really, really well-run event. If you're a City of Boston resident, we encourage them to be there because there's just so much information. Even if you're not looking for housing, you might know someone who might have some housing issues, and the resources will be there. This is a one-stop shop to deal with any and every housing issue in one day.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Really a pleasure. Thank you.
Will Onoha from the Mayor's Office of Fair Housing and Equity.